Hi Hussey-Mayfield patrons, this is Shelby Couch. I'm one of the teen and adult services librarians here at Hussey-Mayfield. I'm a little newer, so I may have not met everyone, but some of you may know me and have done some classes with me already. So I have been deciding to do some of the things that I've already done in the past that went really well, and some of the things that I've been doing at home, and I thought that you guys might like to learn them too. So the first thing I'm going to do in this video is teach you how to make homemade white bread. This is a program that I did probably early January this year. I had a lot of patrons come and really enjoy it. And what's great about it is it doesn't take a lot of ingredients. You probably have almost everything you need at home. And it makes 2 huge white fluffy loaves of bread that you can use for sandwiches, grilled cheese, and all sorts of things. My husband eats sandwiches every day for work, so I actually make them every Sunday so that he has sandwich for work. And then I also make it so that we can make grilled cheese sandwiches and have a couple meals at home every week. But sometimes also with the second loaf, I donate it as well if I know we won't use it. Because even though it lasts a couple weeks, we may not go through it because there's just 2 of us. But for those of you with large families, this might be really, really great for you. The other important thing to note is that homemade bread is actually a lot healthier than store-bought bread. So even if you can't get it, if you can't get bread at the store, that's okay, because making it this way, you actually get more nutrients in the bread because there's not as many holes. You'll actually notice with this bread, it's a lot fluffier, has more nutrients in it, and while it is crumblier, it has a lot more flavor to it. All right, well, I'm gonna go over all of the instructions and everything, and we'll get started. All right, patrons, the recipe we're going to use is actually a recipe I found on Pinterest, so I have to give credit to the author, whose name is Lil Luna. And I will include that link in the video below so you can go there and find it. However, the recipe I'm crediting to her, but the methodology is my own. This took a lot of figuring out for me of what works in my kitchen. So our home is generally really cold, and for bread to rise, you need heat. So I had to come up with some of the different things myself. So that is why I want to make sure I give credit to the author for the recipe, but the ideas are mine. Also below, you'll find a set of tips and tricks. Some of them I will reference in this video. Some of them you might have to read yourself. But figuring this recipe out and how it works for you and your family and your kitchen is all up to you. And it's actually quite fun, I think. I learned a lot of science doing this. So the recipe for this is homemade bread recipe by Lil Luna, like I said. And she also includes a nutritional guide. So it's very simple. All you need is regular, just all-purpose flour. Doesn't matter what brand. Mine's Kroger, but I've used Walmart before. And then regular table salt. Just regular granulated white sugar. Vegetable oil. You can use canola oil. You can use olive oil. Whatever oil works for you is fine. I just happen to have this on hand, and it tastes fine with it, so I use it. You will not need an entire stick of butter, but just a little butter to brush on top at the end. It's your preference, it's optional, but I like my bread buttered at the top. Gives it a little bit more flavor. Then I have 2.5 cups warm water here. And the important thing to note on this is that I have a water cooler and warmer. So I get mine out of a hot water dispenser, but it is too hot at that point. It's right below boiling, which is too hot. If your water is too hot, it will kill your yeast. So I actually have to get it out of there and give it about 10 or 15 minutes to cool. So you should be able to stick it in here and it not be so hot you have to pull your finger immediately out. So you want it warm, but not too hot, but you don't want it too cold. And this is an experiment you might have to try yourself. And if you do, that's okay, because it only takes a few minutes to test out your yeast. And if it doesn't work, you pour it out and you try it again. The last ingredient you need is active dry yeast. So this recipe calls for 1 packet. Which is fine. You can get 3 of these for 82 cents at the store. However, also Costco sells big packages of it, which I have purchased for, I think it was about $5 for a big package. And I have the picture included in this video. And I have been working off that, and I have been using it for quite some time. I've had it for a little less than 6 months, and we used it at the library for programming. And it went through probably 50 loaves of bread, and now I still use it at home as well. So that is all you need to get started for the food. Before we get started making our bread, I just want to go over the supplies you'll need as well. Some of these are things I happen to have at home. Some of them I purchased myself or have acquired over time. But all your basics. You're going to need a large mixing bowl, and this bowl is going to have to be something that you use several times to proof your bread, spray it with oil. So one big bowl is all you need. Just make sure it's rather large because you don't want your stuff spewing everywhere. You're going to need 2 loaf pans because it makes 2 loaves of bread. Now you do not have to make both at one time. You can freeze or refrigerate the other one. That's up to you. The other thing you'll need is some measuring cups. I have an entire set of these, and I like to use the 4 cup because it's big and it holds a lot of the flour. And then I have another Pyrex measuring cup for extra things. I also have 2 loaf pans, and I actually got one of these at the dollar store, and it's worked just fine ever since. I have 2 because I make both loaves at the same time, but you do not have to. You can refrigerate or freeze the bread dough as you like. But it's kind of just what works for you. I haven't found anything that works for me, so I either make the second loaf and donate it like I said, or we end up using it. I also have some press and seal plastic wrap so that you can proof the bread and it stays sealed. Then I have a pizza cutter because you'll have to cut the dough in half for both loaves. I have a little container and a baster for the butter to put on top. And then couple of measuring spoons. I have a tablespoon and a 1/4 teaspoon because you'll need it. A 1/4 teaspoon and a tablespoon. And then some oil, some spray oil. And last is a hand mixer with dough hooks. So you can use a stand mixer, or you can completely do it by hand. You don't even need this, but this kind of takes some of the arm work out of it. It's going to hurt your arms if you're doing it yourself by hand, which is fine. I actually found this one at Walmart for $18.97, and it's worked ever since, but it's got the dough hooks on it, so those are important to have. And once you have all these things, you're ready to work. All right, this recipe only takes 6 easy steps, but the first thing we have to do is set up our yeast. So I have the 2 1/4 teaspoon of yeast in here, and then once my water is at room temperature and it's warm the way I want it to, I'm going to go ahead and pour it in. And the last thing you'll need to do is just reach in and get a little pinch of salt. I usually do a little bit because salt actually accelerates the use of yeast. Sugar actually accelerates the use of yeast, not salt. You want sugar. And then once you do, you want to bring the camera over here. So it's going to take about 8 to 10 minutes, and you'll see the yeast in here, and you see it floating in the water here. It's going to start to bubble and foam, and you'll see a few bubbles pop up. Once your yeast is bubbly and foamy on top, it's about ready. So I usually give it 8 to 10 minutes. All right, so after your 8 or 9 minutes is up, maybe 10 at most, this is what your yeast should look like inside the bowl here. This one is one big bubbly foam, but sometimes it'll be smaller ones. You'll know, it'll look something like this. As long as you have a few bubbles like this, you're good. If not, go ahead and dump it out and try it again and do something a little different, because either the yeast has died or it didn't have enough heat or sugar or accelerant to blow up. So once we've done that, we're going to complete step 1 by adding the sugar, 1/4 cup of sugar, in addition to the pinch you put in there. Then we're going to add a tablespoon of salt. We'll add 2 tablespoons of sugar, 2 tablespoons of oil, excuse me. And then once we do that, we're going to pour in 4 cups of our flour. It's not going to get the dough all the way there, but it's going to go ahead and start it. So you need 5.5 to 6.5 cups for this recipe, but that includes what you use to knead. So we start out with 4 cups to get the dough really going, and then you'll add more as necessary. So go ahead and start the dough by sticking your dough hooks in. Just put it on 1. Now, making bread is actually a really, really great thing if you're angry or upset, because you get to punch the dough, you're going to knead it. So as you saw, you're going to keep using the dough and using your dough hooks to make it until it starts to form a ball. You'll see that it's formed its own shape. You might have to add up to 1.5 cups of flour to it, but don't be afraid if you don't think you add enough flour, because as you knead, you're going to add more flour into it. So this surface I have already wiped down with a Clorox wipe, and then I wiped it down with water so there's no chemicals on it. And we've added flour to it. And don't be afraid to add too much flour. You're going to knead for a while on this. About 5 minutes or so here, and then you'll knead it after it proofs a couple times. So the only thing you'll need to do after you've got your ball formed, You're gonna pull it out on here. You're gonna empty out your bowl, get all the flour out of it. And then all you're gonna do to knead is press down and just keep turning it. The reason you are kneading your bread and why it's so important to knead is that every little bit you knead activates the gluten. So if you think about bread like a hot air balloon, the bread itself is the balloon and the yeast is filling it up with hot air. The gluten is activating and pushing itself together to make a net to hold the yeast in so your bread doesn't explode. So I think the science behind it's really cool. You can actually look it up online too. And you'll just knead for about 5 minutes or so and make sure you keep putting some flour on there. If you're feeling sticky parts, you want to make sure you get those. And you want to make sure you get it to a good consistency. And you'll see that the bread will stop separating as easy. It'll start to look more like a uniform dough. Then there's something else that we have that we can test it with. I actually learned this from a really good friend of mine who makes bread a lot. It's called the window test, which I will show you here in just a few minutes when this bread is ready. So you'll just keep kneading for about 5 or 10 more minutes, and then you'll try your window test. All right, now that I've kneaded the bread for a little bit, you can see it's got a nice formed ball here. It's all ready to go. The way I can test it and make sure it's ready is called the window test. So if you kind of pinch it and hold it up to the light, it's gonna separate a little bit, but the idea is that it doesn't tear very easy. So if you can do it enough to see your finger through the bread, like so, then it's all good to go, which this bread is. Now while I was making the bread, the other thing I was doing was boiling a pot of water. Not everybody has to do this if you have a different proofing system, but the way I have to proof it is to put it in my oven and use the steam from boiling water to create a heated environment to help the dough rise. So what I'm gonna do next is place the dough in the bowl and I'm gonna oil it first. And you don't have to clean it out or anything, it doesn't matter. You're just gonna spray it really good so there's lots of oil in there. Stick your bread dough ball in here and then turn it around so it gets all nice and coated. And it's all safe there in the bottom of the bowl. And you can see that my bread takes up maybe half of this bowl right now. That's gonna be important for the size. Now I've covered mine with dish towels before. It doesn't really matter what you use, but it can stick to the top of it. It can stick to your dish towels and then you have to wash them. So I've been using press and seal. My roll's a little old here, so let me get some off. Once you've got something to cover it with, you'll just make sure it's sealed. It doesn't have to be perfect, just enough that you can keep most of the air in there. It's just basically to contain the heat, because yeast needs heat to rise. All right, so all I'm gonna do is come bring it over here to my oven. I'm gonna stick it in the top. And then I've got this boiling pot of water and I'm gonna stick it right underneath. And when I close the door, it's gonna create a heated environment. And I'm going to put it on for 1 hour or until it doubles in size. Mine usually takes an hour to double in size. So then you're good for an hour and well, it proofs. All right, so now we're already on to step 4. My dough has proofed for 1 hour, and as you can see, it's completely filled up the bowl at this point. So what we're gonna do, because it's got to proof again, we're gonna go ahead and put our water back on high so it can go ahead and be reheating and boiling again. And then right now there's a bunch of air in here because it's been rising this entire time. So we're gonna punch the dough down and it's just releasing the air. As you can see, it kind of flattened and deflated a little bit. And I'll put some more flour on the surface here. So now that it's risen once, you just want to go ahead, you don't need to do it for more than a couple minutes. Just kind of knead it to get some of that extra air out. Oh, just heard an air bubble pop there. And all we're doing is just getting some of that air out, reactivating the gluten. And you'll just do this for about 2 or so minutes. And once it's all good, ready to go, I'm just going to use my cutter here and cut the dough in half. And that way there's 2 loaves worth of bread. And I'm just going to knead each one for a second. Spread out my flour. All right. Now I have already greased both of these pans. So all I'm going to do is kind of roll it up so there's a seam at the bottom and it's got a nice flat top. Stick it in there just like that. And I'm going to do the same thing to both loaves. Now when we put this back in the oven, we're going to cover both of these loaf pans and do the exact same thing. We're going to proof it for an hour. Cover it with plastic wrap. I'm going to go ahead and put my boiling water underneath there. And it'll proof for 1 more hour, and then after that it'll be ready to bake. So as soon as I get this roll all ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and stick it in here. I'm going to use one of my previous pieces of plastic wrap here. I'll go ahead and cover my other one. Now my water's going to take a little extra couple minutes to boil, and that's okay because there's still lots of heat in here. I prevented opening it for the entire hour. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on for another hour. And then as soon as my pot is boiling, I'll throw it in there for the remainder of the time. It should take about another 5 or so minutes. And then let it proof for 1 more hour. It's been an hour. As you can see, they have proofed really big. I went ahead and taken them out of the oven. As soon as I took them out of the oven, I'm preheating it to 375 degrees because the next step is to bake. So all we're going to do is pull our cover off as easily as we can. And if the dough deflates a little bit, that's okay. It's going to rise back up when it cooks, especially since it's so large now. So we're just going to pull these covers off as easy as possible. And then they're going to go in the oven for at 375 degrees for 30 to 35 minutes. Once they're nice and golden brown and I can tap it and it sounds hollow, they should be good. And it might not look as pretty as I wanted it to, but it's going to taste delicious. So I'm going to go ahead and stick them in for my 30 to 35 minutes. This is the last step. They've come out of the oven. You can see they've got a nice golden brown top and you can tap it. And they've got good golden brown sides. Mine cooked for 32 minutes. So all I did was melt 2 tablespoons of butter. And I'm going to brush the top of them. And then after that, they are ready to serve and eat or seal up for later. They're really good and they have a nice flavor to them. And mine will usually last in a sealed bag for at least a week or longer. But I also have been giving them to people that need them too. So if you make 2 and you don't need them, pass it around or see if a family member needs it or donate it or freeze it for later for your family. So if you have any questions or you need some troubleshooting help if something doesn't quite work, go ahead and shoot me an email. I have left all my information at the end of this video, but otherwise, thanks for watching and I hope your bread comes out tasty.